Welcome to mini lesson number 7. We're cruising down to the end of our unit on argumentative writing. Today we're going to look at 3 components that help tie the piece together and kind of elevate the style and also bring it to a close. By now you should have a thesis, an introduction, and a complete body. You should have all of your sources cited and a work cited written. And now it's time to worry about the hook, the title, and the closing of it. So let's get into this. So let's start with the title. And when you're doing this assignment, you can really do them in any order. But we're going to start with the title. A title has 3 important jobs. It needs to make your audience want to read it. It's like an advertisement, basically. It should communicate the topic of your essay. Imagine how frustrating it would be if, it was called like "Why Doritos Are Awesome to Eat," and then it was an essay about dogs. That wouldn't make any sense. And it should definitely hint at the point of view. So if I wrote "Why Doritos Are Awesome to Eat," and it was all about, why eating snack chips is bad for you, that would kind of not make sense. So let's look at this. So a title like "Horrible Behavior," it might be interesting, but it doesn't give the reader a clear sense of what the essay is going to be about. Something like "School is Important" is clear because we know that it's about school and we know that it's important. The most effective titles do all 3 jobs. They are creative enough to be interesting, but they also convey your topic and your point of view clearly. So here's some different types of titles and some examples of each. So one could be a question. Could wiping out grades improve learning? Okay, you just title it with a question, and we know that it's going to be discussing that. It's going to be about grades and improving learning. It could also be a statement like, "Is it time for grades to go?" or "It's time for grades to go." Geez, Mr. Carr learned the difference between a question and a statement. Another kind of fun one is to use this sentence starter, "the case for." So it could say, "the case for throwing out grades." So we know that this is going to be about grades, but it's going to be about getting rid of grades. And then you can also use a why title, "why grades need to be abolished." So we know clearly that it's going to be about grading, but it's going to be a negative slant towards getting rid of them. Another way that you can do it is called a 2-part title. So you'll notice here they have a colon. Okay. So we've got things like grades, should they be abolished? It's a question. Or we've got grades, it's time for them to go. Okay. Or we've got kind of a creative phrase plus a 1-part title. The radical idea, colon. Why grades need to be abolished, quality, not quantity, colon, the case for throwing out grades. So they gave us, 2 different examples here, not to be confused that there's one of them. And then the other thing, so you're going to be writing a title, and titles need to be thought about. They need to be interesting. They need to convey information. But you have a lot of leeway in your title. What you don't have leeway in is the grammar and the syntax of it. So there's a few things that have to happen. Number 1, capitalization is different than standard English. You capitalize almost every word of it. So you always capitalize the first and last word of the title no matter what. And if it's a 2-part title, you capitalize the first word of the second part. So let's take a look here. We've got capital G, colon, capital S. And then the last word, and then actually every word is capitalized here. But if we look at this one here, quality, not quantity, all caps, and then a colon, and we know this has to be capitalized, and this has to be capitalized, but you'll notice that the for is not capitalized. So let's take a look at why. You capitalize all other words except articles. So things like a, an, and the. We don't capitalize conjunctions like and, but, for, nor, or, so, and yet. And we don't do prepositions, short prepositions like at, by, for, in, off, of, read those backwards, on, and to. So if we go back to that example, to is not capitalized, for is not capitalized, for is not capitalized there. What else needs to be capitalized? We capitalize short verbs such as be, am, is, and was. They are also known as modal verbs. They are capitalized. Okay, a little bit more here. That's it for titles. So now let's talk about the hook. So a hook is the advertisement that comes next to get people to read it. You want to increase interest, and it comes even before you build background knowledge or you present your thesis statement. So there are 6 types of hooks in this one. There's questions or a series of questions. There's quotations by famous people. There's anecdotes. We've talked about what anecdotes are. There's statistics or facts. You would need to source cite them. Strong statements, such as one of the most time-honored traditions of school, maybe its biggest problem, grades. Okay, and then there's also ways to describe things. These are all ways to do hooks, and you can read these each individual. There's a lot of choice there. But then the closing paragraph. This is super, super important. So we're going to go step by step through this information. So the last paragraph of your essay, it needs to include these things. It needs to have a restatement of the thesis, period. It needs to have a brief summary of your main points. And you need to word it differently from how you did in the introduction. So I'm going to zoom in here and just give you a little no copy and paste. Do not copy and paste your introduction into your conclusion. It's super tacky. It's bad writing. The next thing is that there needs to be some connection to your hook. It's not required, but it makes for a more polished essay. We call this chiasm. So we worked our way through the essay, and then we take it back to the beginning and talk about the hook. So if you posed a question in your hook, maybe you answer the question in the closing. And then a really powerful memorable closing thought is another way to have in your closing argument. And this is the what now or the call to action. This is, okay, so I wasted, so much of your life by having you read this paper. How can it help you? What are you going to do now? And some way that people do this is they pose a question that you're not going to answer, but it just gets them thinking about the next steps. You can end with an anecdote. You can end with a positive prediction. Look at this. If schools take the brave steps away from grades, they're likely to discover something they've wanted all along. Students who truly love to learn. Okay? Or you can be a naysayer, a doomsdayer. Negative. If we keep the current grading system as it is, many of our students will never know the true joy of learning. Right? Dun, dun, dun. Another way is to have a powerful image or a description. Like, just imagine it. Instead of asking, quote, what do we have to do to get an A, end quote, students will want to know how they can improve, grow, and learn. Okay? So it's just a way of saying, we've posed this whole argument. What now? How can you learn from it? So what is your task? In whatever order you want, you need to write a title, a hook, and a closing using the information of this lesson. If you have another way you'd like to do it, I'm sure you're practiced at it. I'd like you to try one of these ways for this one now. And as always, there's an example. You can go to Essay 1, Draft 3, and now it has a title, a hook, and a closing. So by now, let's just double check where we're at. You should have an introduction, and that should have a hook, some background knowledge, and your thesis. You should have a body that has claims 1, 2, and 3, and there should be some counter argument. There's different places where that could go. And now you're going to have a conclusion. And in that conclusion, you're going to have a couple of parts and pieces. The only thing left to do after this one is going to be transitions. That's making sure that your paper flows well and doesn't hit abrupt stops. All right, as always, feel free to ask for help.